processing company. I can help you in any way. Let me know.
Next item on the agenda is a presentation of the Special Audit Report. Are you kicking this off, Mr. Lamb?
The city engaged Reuben Brown to do a special audit. The council approved the statement of work last year now. And tonight, Christine Solomon with Reuben Brown is here to present the results of that audit.
Mayor, council members, my name is Christina Solomon. I'm from Reuben Brown. I'm a partner in our Business Advisory Services group, and I'm happy to present our findings to you tonight. So to start with, just a recap of what the scope of our engagement was. We were engaged to review the applicable policies and procedures to gain an understanding of the current purchasing and accounts payable processes. We were to interview selected city employees, including the department heads. We were to perform data analysis related to the city's disbursements, purchase card activity, and its vendor master file. We were to conduct sample testing to obtain reasonable assurance that established procedures and guidelines were being followed. We were to provide kind of an assessment of the city's purchasing and accounts payable processes for proper segregation of duties. We were to review of the approval and termination of P-card holders associated with training, and conduct an anonymous questionnaire, involuntary questionnaire, to gather information from all departments and employees related to city procurement practices. So as a result of our field work, we identified a few best practices. And those things really relate to the fact that templates exist and are maintained by the purchasing department for the request of quote and request for proposal processes, that a conflict of interest policy exists and council members and executive management sign conflicts of interest forms annually, acknowledging compliance and understanding, that proper internal records are maintained to support city disbursements, and reasonable segregation of duties exist among P-card reconcilers and approvers. Now, along with those best practices, there were a few things that we asked in our report that we noted as considerations, or things that the city should take under advisement to improve their best practices. The first was to update the purchasing manual. The second was to ensure that non-purchase order process complies with policy, that they're dotting their I's and crossing their T's and keeping evidence of everything that they're supposed to be keeping evidence of, to conduct periodic purchasing and P-card training, and to implement an anonymous hotline. With the data analysis that we performed, we did several queries related to whether or not there were duplicate payments, duplicate addresses. When we looked at the disbursement activity and the journal entry analysis that we didn't note any exceptions. When we looked at the P-card payments and the vendor master file, we noted 4 reportable items. The first being that there were 8 duplicate vendors in the vendor master file. That's really not incredibly uncommon with large cities. You might have, 2 instances of having to pay a utility, and you might reasonably have a reason for that, but it's always a best practice to go in and keep that vendor file master up to date and not have duplicates when you don't need to. We noted 42 instances where P-card users exceeded their monthly limit. Now, with that finding, I will say that policy requires approval to exceed that limit, and that approval, just evidence of that approval, wasn't necessarily maintained and documented, but we understand that it did occur. There was 1 transaction for less than $1,000, which violated the state statute, and 1 transaction for less than $1,500, which violated state statute and purchasing policy. In that, and I think in that particular instance, the policy called for kind of a verbal quote for certain bids, and the evidence of that verbal quote wasn't documented or maintained. As part of our work, we also were provided with city council questions. I think there were 14 of them. And through our interviews with the department heads and the work that we conducted, we endeavored to answer them. The key items that we noted as a result of those questions really developed along 4 themes. That the city does have a purchasing department that provides bid templates for RFPs and RPQs. The city has procurement procedures in place that requires the advertisement for bids over a $10,000 threshold. Vendor performance forms are available and may be filled out by any department to provide feedback on vendor quality and timeliness of service or delivery of goods, and that the city does track sole source contracts, including the amount and expiration of each contract. We also noted that as part of answering the City Council questions, that current policy doesn't specifically reference Missouri State Statute 105.454.1, which states that no single transaction over 500 or an annual transaction total of 5,000 should occur without proper bidding procedures, with elected officials being bid at the lowest price. However, city procedures do include a requirement to fill out a conflict of interest form for any transaction greater than 500, and we found that this conflict of interest forms were filled out to disclose those types of transactions. We also noted that the city does not have procedures specifically related to minority bidding and does not have a debarred vendor listing. We took the questions and the themes and the scope of our analysis and created a brief survey that was available to all employees to take. We received 293 responses. 121 of those were P card holders or approvers. The survey results for the city revealed a positive culture with expectations that improprieties are reported and that individuals are responsible for them or held accountable. The responders also indicated that they were neutral or only somewhat agreed that they have clear guidelines on when a purchasing opportunity should be advertised. Survey responders did not have a strong agreement that there is a listing of debarred vendors. There was also a lack of understanding of how to report improper or illegal acts, with just less than half of the respondents indicating that they weren't aware of how to make an anonymous report if they wanted to. So in conclusion, we've submitted to the mayor and this council a summary report as well as a technical report. And what our findings are is that the City of Lee Summit generally has an effective control structure for purchasing and accounts payable processes, but that the internal control structure could be strengthened by addressing the recommendations as noted in our report, related to things such as policy and training and best practices. I am happy to go into more detail about any technical findings, or I'm happy to open it to questions and defer to your direction.
Do we have any questions at this point? Councilmember Benny?
Well, I think it's important to talk about the technical report and the information, and just kind of, we got this presented to us and we have to make it a public document, I think, so that everybody else can see it, I think. Is that a good process so that everybody else can see what we've now seen? So can you tell us kind of the secondary report? There's a summary report and a technical report, is that right?
That is correct. The summary report is very much akin to the executive summary that's in the technical report. So the technical report is approximately 40 pages long that we've issued in draft form, and it contains the following sections. It has the introduction, project scope, executive summary, a review of our data analysis, a section that addresses the responses to the City Council's questions, a section that addresses the response to the citywide survey, our conclusion, and then there are exhibits. Exhibit A addresses the overview of the purchasing and accounts payable process, where we tend to kind of just lay out an overview of how that process works. B is the kind of the responses to the City Council questions. We included, based upon our interviews, we tried to address answers to each and every question that was submitted by the City Council. Exhibit D is our observations and recommendations. These would list things that many of which we covered in our findings and best practices, as I've discussed. Exhibit E are process improvement opportunities. These would be things that are really more along the lines of items that might include your efficiency or effectiveness, not necessarily things that we would note as a finding. And the final exhibit is the journal entry and the disbursement data analysis highlights, an overview of what we did and what we found.
So we need to make a motion or do anything official to the document itself?
May I address Councilmember Benny's question? If the council chooses to make the technical report dated November 2016 as a document that is available for public review, the council would need to make a motion to make the technical report of November 2016 as a public document available for review.
Mr. Mayor, I have a motion.
Please.
I would move to make the Reuben Brown technical report of November 2016 a public document.
Second.
Moved and seconded to make the Reuben Brown technical report a public document. All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Motion
Thank you.
passed.
All right. So if I may, just kind of, I know you hit the executive summary, and then I'm going to run back through the technical report. If I look at the back, there's 52,203 transactions over 3 years that got analyzed, and $288+ million of transactions. So we've found two problems that you've pointed out here, page 4 of the technical report. And these are the ones that I think we've known, but it was good to see that it is what was found. So there was a fiscal year 15 amount for $768, which you considered an exception because it violated state statute, but it did not violate city purchasing policy. Correct?
Correct.
Okay.
The 768. That is correct. It was $768, and it was below. So that one was considered. It was because it didn't. It violated the statute.
It was over the $500
Yes.
rule that went into effect in
Correct.
12 or 13 or whatever it was. Okay. And then did not violate city policy at the time because that wasn't specifically required. And then there's a city policy about disclosure, and you said that transaction was actually disclosed.
On the conflicts of interest disclosure form, that business relationship was disclosed.
Okay. So you found a second item in fiscal year 16 for $1,170 that you believe violated the state statute and the purchasing policy. But that was also one that was disclosed.
Again, yes, in the sense that the conflict of interest policy that the council members fill out require you to disclose business relationships. That relationship was disclosed. Specific transactions, I don't believe, were required to be disclosed.
Okay. So we had two transactions totaling $1,938.
Correct.
Okay. So what I see, and I find it's interesting because you have several things, and I think Mr. Arbo made a pledge to us that they have a management team meeting coming up where they're going to look for opportunities to implement some of this stuff. So I think there's some policy updates. Looks like to me that the state statutes changed, and I know our legal staff has their hands full constantly juggling, but it seems that even a city can't always stay on top of all the state statute changes, is what it seems like to me.
I do agree that I think the purchasing policy could stand a fresh set of eyes and some updating. I think as the P-card process gets more prevalently used, continued training and making sure your policy is consistent with P-card limits and things like that, so people can't inadvertently violate your purchasing policy because their P-card limit allows them to do it. I think those types of considerations should be something management should look at for updating their policy. Correct.
Is that also a vendor discussion? Do we need staff to be concerned about vendor dialing the cards back, or I wasn't quite sure.
No, I mean, I think I think policy, I think training regarding, if you're talking how a person uses their P card, for example, I think continued training, whether, I don't think it needs to be every month or even every quarter, but some sort of dialogue that allows people to kind of stay in front of, here's what you use your P card for, here's what you don't use your P card for, here are some kind of guidelines to know when maybe you need to raise your hand and make sure you're doing it according to Hoyle.
But maybe at least an annual training requirement. And
I think that would
dates.
be helpful, because I think right now they get training in order to obtain the P card. But certainly as people's levels, roles, and responsibility change, they may not remember something that they were told, a year, 2 years plus ago.
Okay. So you did an internal survey, which was really interesting, because overall, my interpretation was most people feel pretty comfortable, but looks like there's still some rooms where people might have questions, how to get approval. What was the one? How to anonymously complain
Right.
about a concern. So it looked like there were a couple items still that may be available for staff and others in this process improvement to take a look at. Is that
Correct. The survey was really, I think had a couple benefits of doing it. One, when you're polling and we're making an opportunity for the entire city employee to weigh in, that survey had to be kind of abbreviated and to the point. But what it did when we got the survey results back is that it definitely affirmed what we were seeing through our department head interviews and what we were seeing in the field, that generally there's a culture that the employees are trying to do the right thing. Now, there might not be really crystal clear policies. They might not know how to navigate that real nimbly all the time. But I think there was a sense of they want to follow the rules, and sometimes it isn't always real crystal clear to them if they are. So I think the opportunities that come from that is opportunities to tighten that up by training, by communication, by crisper policies, those types of things.
Let me ask a specific question, if I might, for your response. So Exhibit A in that technical report is the overview of purchasing and accounts payable process. Mm-hmm. And in there's a matrix that has 4 boxes showing amounts and then showing general guidance of what's to be done. Is this something, are all these categories currently updated? Do we need to be reviewed? Is this something staff needs to review, this matrix, to make sure that any state statute changes are encouraged or implemented in this as well?
So
Does this look like it's already ready?
I believe this is just a summary that we prepared from the existing policies. So I believe if you go to the policies, this should be pretty consistent with what the present state looks like right now. And so we put that in there so we understand what current state is. We included recommendations to say, you might want to look at ways to update those policy for a variety of things, including different limits and things that might improve your efficiency and your effectiveness and maybe take away some of that ambiguity. But this document, I think, is really meant to say this is what current state looks like.
And then I know the council submitted a long list of questions that included 18 specific questions. Was there anything that jumped out in any of those responses that concerned you as an auditor, or any process improvement opportunities that really stood out in those responses?
I think that we did note that they could work on making sure that they understand the right debarred vendor listing and make sure that they tighten up some of those, how do you know which vendors you're not supposed to be doing business with, to make sure that keeps advertising. Our interview responses and what we've documented in the responses to the question, I don't think anything stood out as didn't raise red flags to us per se. But I think they were certainly great questions for the city council to know the answers to. And I think that's what we were endeavoring to do with documenting our responses, is to kind of lay out the facts of the matter as they stand today.
I saw on your cover sheet you have 314 phone numbers. Y'all not from here, are you?
We're from our St. Louis office.
Oh, okay. Okay. Have you been to Lee Summit before? Or?
No, we do have a Kansas City team, but the folks that did the work out of our business advisory group were both located in St. Louis.
Very good. And Reuben Brown's not like a small potato either. You guys are kind
No,
of.
but
what are there? Four, big six? What remains these days in accounting work?
we are probably 30-something, top 50 firm. We've got offices in St. Louis, Kansas City. We just are moving to the Missouri side this week, I think. Colorado, and Nashville.
So,
So-
100, 200, 500 associates?
500 plus firm.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Excuse me, Councilmember Sy.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of questions, and I may have just missed these in the report, and I'm looking at the technical report itself. The survey itself was supposed to be anonymous, and how did you assure it was anonymous?
We conducted the survey using a tool called SurveyMonkey. Many of you might be familiar with it. We didn't ask for names. We didn't retain any of that information.
But you used emails?
We did have to send an email out to everybody to click on a link to go access the report, correct?
Okay. And of those that were surveyed, there were 200, I believe, 293 responses. How many employees are in the city?
I believe, I can't recall how many we sent the survey to. It was over how many? It was over 500.
And you only got 293 responses back. And I would assume that's probably because it's part-time, maybe people, or we don't know.
We didn't put the full court press to solicit. I mean, we opened it up to people. We did send a second reminder, but we also wanted to be cognizant of their roles and responsibilities and access, whether or not they had access to a computer during working hours or whatnot. So, while I will tell you that I was surprised, even 293 responses is good based on a lot of surveys. That, I mean, again, it's not a statistical survey. You can't extrapolate these results. It is, a survey monkey that's meant to take kind of the pulse for those who respond, and an avenue for them to weigh in and provide their feedback. And it gives the council and management an opportunity to say, what are they answering that we were surprised, or what's inconsistent or inconsistent with our expectations, so they can develop training or policies or procedures or processes to better accommodate that.
Okay, in regard to the P card holders then, how many P card holders are in the city total?
If we remember correctly, it's about 300.
About 300, so we had 121 P card responders then. Okay.
Correct.
Of those 300, are they all active users of P cards? Or some of them just have a P card but they never use it?
There are 300 who have P cards, and I don't know as we stand here what the volume of activity looks like on each one. We have all that activity, so if that's something the council wants me to provide an answer to, we certainly can.
Professor Lamb.
Conrad Lamb, Finance Director. I can answer that. We issue a lot of P cards, and some people may use it once or twice a year. We have heavy users that use their P card almost daily, but we do have, of that 300 that we have out there, we have a lot of people that do not use their P card very frequently.
When looking at, let me get the number here a minute. Okay, when you looked at disbursements greater than 1,000 that were over 161 transactions, which is worth $280 million, you selected 40 purchase orders. How did you arrive at only 40?
We wanted to use a sampling technique, so we wanted to take a sample, and we judgmentally selected 40.
It seems like a very small number when you're looking at that many transactions and that amount of money.
Well, our objective was to make sure that when we understood the process, we did data analytics on the actual quantity and amount and payees. When we thought 40 would allow us kind of that snapshot of what we're seeing, and then to present to you. And if the council directs us to look at more, we certainly can expand that sample.
Of those 40, were they equally distributed among the different departments? Were they focused in one area?
We used our data analysis to inform our sample. So essentially, any trends that we saw in the data analysis, we focused our sample based on that. So, like for instance, that Benford's analysis that we did, if we saw something that went outside of that range, we made sure we included one of those transactions in the sample.
Okay, that's all I have right now.
Other questions? Councilmember Marino?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a couple quick questions here. We can really quickly here move to page 11.
And their council member.
In page 11, it states that you obtained a list of elected officials from FY14 to FY17 of local elected officials. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you obviously went through 2015 and 2016. That's obviously stated. In 2014, you have 0. Was that just from a random sample, or was that from all transactions that involved an elected official?
So one point to clarify with this table, and we certainly can amend as necessary, but the transactions over $500 are those that would be outside of what would be travel advances, because we understand that city officials do receive travel advances. So if that disbursement was a travel advance, for example, it wasn't included on this report. What we included in this table would be those things between the city and elected official that required some sort of like purchasing activity and functions too. So if you would like to have all those transactions included in this table to answer that question, we are happy to do that as we finalize the report.
Well, I'm not asking for that, but I do appreciate it. So let me ask you really quick. A total annual service charge. So when you see a total annual service charge or total annual agreement, would you consider that's paid out maybe quarterly? Would you consider that one transaction or multiple transactions? When you were examining these documents and you looked at contracts,
Okay.
and if a contract was for an annual charge, would you consider that, even if it was paid quarterly, do you consider that one transaction, or do you consider that multiple transactions?
I mean, I would need more context about
That's fine.
what you're looking for in
Okay.
there to proproperly answer that.
No, you're fine. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I
think that people could interpret it different ways.
Absolutely.
Our data, when we did our data analysis queries, it would have treated each disbursement every time it was made as a separate instance.
Okay. So, when you reviewed the list, were you provided any documents involving UIS? Do you recall?
The list of
Elected officials?
elected officials, I don't recall.
You don't recall?
I can endeavor.
It's okay. Okay, so on that list, the first quarter of 2014, the company now at some point divested from an elected official on this body, but it did involve an elected official, and the payment for that quarter was $600.
Okay.
But the total annual service agreement was for $2,400. And when you reviewed that, did you happen to see if that was bid out?
I'd have to, I mean, I'm happy to take this information
Could you?
and look at that data analysis.
Could you? I mean, I don't know if I'm even allowed to say could you. I don't know if that's part of the agreement we have, but I'm concerned because you have zero here, but on an invoice billing period, invoice number 19039 from 1/1/2014 to 3/31/2014, the invoice date being 2/18 of 2014. The terms of a total annual service agreement of $2,400, and the check was made out for $600 to a company involving an elected official at that time.
Now, I will say that our query was we had the elected officials' names and their address. So we ran queries to the vendor, disbursements and P-card activity to see if we saw some iteration of that elected official's name or their address. So if there's a business relationship that doesn't have an elected official's name, or if it has a different address, we might not have run those queries. We are happy to do that if the council wants to provide us a list of those entities and addresses. We're happy to do it.
So just I want to clarify real quick then. So what you looked for was if the name of the elected official was in the name of the company, or if the company address matched the same address of the elected official.
Correct.
Okay, and if it did not have either of those, you did not review them.
Correct. They wouldn't have shown up on this report.
I know what you stated. I'm just clarifying just for the listeners or folks in the crowd or people who are going to view this online at some point in time, or people that will view the documents at some point. So let me pull that up real quick. So we do have that, and then we also have a payment involving a total annual service charge that was paid out on January the 1st of $435. Invoice number 18582, and it involved a total annual service charge agreement. So when the city entered into this agreement with this company, they signed up for a total annual service charge. It seems like that service charge was under the threshold of $500. In that payment, it was $435. When the elected official no longer was part of the company, it quickly jumped up to $600, so it jumped up over the $500 threshold. So if you could also review while you're looking at some of those, whether that was bid out or not. That's a question I have. Were these bid out? Because you mentioned state statute, but state statute does include two things. It includes transactional amounts, and it also requires that any transaction involving an elected official must be bid out, and the only way it can go to that elected official if it's the lowest bidder. And we have zero on there, understanding why, given what you stated. So I just wanted to clarify for the record that that's not accurate from 2014. I do have a quick question in terms of city policy. You stated city policy was some of these transactions that took place were compliant with city policy, or at least one of my colleagues had mentioned that. Did you review city policy?
We did.
Okay. And does city policy call for employees to adhere to the laws of the state of Missouri?
I don't have the policy in front of me to cite just chapter and verse, but I mean, I would.
I'm not asking you to do that.
I would generally agree with that.
I didn't know if you looked at that.
I would generally agree with that statement. I don't specifically recall that in the written document.
Okay. A quick question, really quick, for Mr. Arbo. Do employees, are they required to adhere to the laws of the state of Missouri?
In all honesty, sir, that's such a broad question. That's like a person having a speeding ticket exceeding 55 miles an hour versus someone who knowingly had knowledge that we had a state statute that had $500 for an elected official, and knowingly deciding not to do that, there's two different. Can you narrow your scope down? Because
Okay.
I imagine every single employee and every single person in this room right now, and every single person that's listening right now, has probably violated state law at some time.
And that's fair.
So,
That's fair. So,
yeah. So you're going to need to, if you're going, this is what I would say, and I want this to be a dialogue. The staff has really worked hard to not be a part of the review so that you would get as independent of review as possible. So I'm speaking to you with great reluctance because I don't want to give the appearance that we had any kind of involvement with the review. We did not, except for information that they asked us for directly. But I've said this on numerous occasions, and it was obvious that the City of Lee Summit organization was not aware of the $500 limit of the state statute. The time that I learned it was with you, sir, Mr. Marino, when we were at the newly elected officials conference, and we had the people from the Ethics Commission, I think, put that up on the board. That's the first time that I learned of it. So there has not been, with purpose or with intention, to violate Missouri state statute regarding the $500 penalty.
okay. And did you conduct an investigation to come to that conclusion?
Well, basically, we're the organization. If we didn't have knowledge of it, if I didn't have knowledge of it, if my procurement officer didn't have knowledge of it, if it wasn't in our policy, I don't need to conduct an investigation to state that we didn't have knowledge of it. Because if we had knowledge of it, we would put it into the policy. There was not a conscious decision to look around a state statute that we had knowledge of. I think the survey indicated pretty well that the culture of this organization is that we do our very best to abide by all laws. That's our culture.
I'm not
here.
saying that you don't do that. I asked you a question. The question was if somebody violates state statute, is that a violation of city policy?
And I'm not trying to be circular in it, but you've got to be. If I'm being a little extreme, but if we have someone that drives a car 57 miles an hour at a 55 deal, I guess technically that is a violation of our personnel policy. We have to determine, like any good employer, you have to determine is that employee trying to uphold the values of your organization, your culture, and if they are, and if they make wrong decisions, then you talk about it. You try to prevent it from occurring, and then you move on. And that's what I would do in this situation.
Mm-hmm. So, in this aspect, we'll just use your example. Okay, using your example, if somebody were to, violate city policy, the steps you take forward are what?
Well, I've learned I've learned in human resources there's a great word. It's called it depends. It depends on the employee. It depends on whether this is a prevalent practice. Is it a trend, or is it a great employee who was trying to? That if you were in that same set of circumstances, would you have made the same decision if you shared those values of doing what's right? So. The example is if an employee violates a state statute that we think has a significant impact to the city, and that employee should have had knowledge of that violation of state statute, then we would give consideration as to how should the employee be trained. I think this is coming through in their audit report. Do we have a good training program in place? And frankly, we don't even have the policy in place. So even a great training program wouldn't have helped us with this situation. But is there a good training program in place? And is this employee dedicated to the values of the organization? Or is this a continual trend? Or was it done with purpose or personal gain or some of those other things? There's lots of questions you have to ask about it.
And the reason why, and yes, it does, Councilwoman, pertain to the audit, is because there was a statement that said that there was no violation of city policy. So what does city policy say about violating state statutes, city charter? Is that a violation of policy? I'm asking for specific language about the city policy.
Okay, so you're asking if the human resource policies for the city of Lee Summit has a broad statement, and it probably does. It says that the employee commits to following all federal, state, and local regulations during their practice of business. I'm sure I could probably, I can't point it. I'm sure I could probably find that in our personnel regulations. You can probably find that in every single employer.
I would venture to say so. And that's the reason why, that's my concern here, is because we're saying on the record tonight that no city policy was violated. I would disagree with
You're
it.
talking to them about that, not me.
Well, the dais said that up here as well as over here. So I want to just clarify that there is a potential that city policy was potentially violated. We're not discounting that right at this time.
I'm talking specifically about the purchasing policy and the line that was cited in the report.
Well, I understand that, but
You're extrapolating. So
I'm not extrapolating. You said that there was no violation of a city policy, and she stated that that was correct. So I'm clarifying the record.
And we digress.
You know, I don't mean to, I'm not giving the report to you tonight, so I'm not making statements. If you want me to take this and to give you a statement on whether
And that's fair. I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. But this is my concern about this, is because we know that not every transaction was reviewed, and we clearly know that there was an error in 2014 on the transactions. But my concern is that we have employees of this city who are wonderful, hardworking people, and they adhere, I believe, 99.9% of them adhere to the law, right? But clearly, based on your answer survey, over 50 of our employees stated that they witnessed unethical or, I think, illegal acts, including fraud, stealing, or by internal or external parties. So my question is when it comes to city policy, I would like to know if that's in city policy. If it violates state law or city charter, is that a violation of policy? Because my concern is that we have a rule of thumb that it gets to pick and choose based on rank or favorability as to whether that person's held accountable for violating policy or not.
Okay, well, in my world, unfortunately, and maybe in your, and I don't want to go there, I'm just going to say that in the world of being an employer, you do the very best to hire the best employees, to instill them with good ethical values, to train them well, and sometimes they make mistakes. And then you work on how did the mistake get made, how is it that we can better ourselves, and we move on. The question about whether a person observed an ethical violation, you need to understand that you are asking police officers, detectives. You're also asking people who observe elected officials. And so the question would be, what ethical violation and who was it committed by? And so you're not able to state.
That's fair. That's fair. I understand. My concern is we're talking about, what was the total number of respondents was what, 296, I think is what they said, right?
Again, this is a report that they're providing to you.
Okay, I apologize, Steve. The total number of respondents was what exactly again?
200 and
Please, Councilwoman.
93.
293.
193 city employees took the survey.
And close to 50 state that they witnessed such actions. So it's not a small number. We're talking about 20% of the respondents.
If I may, please. Let's finish the audit.
That's fine.
Because the city manager has some meat here that he has to digest.
Absolutely.
And make some corrective actions.
Thank you, Mayor.
And your point's taken.
I appreciate that.
But let's finish the audit, because these ladies didn't.
That's fine.
They're not in a position to.
Okay. So I want to clarify really quick then, page 24. The question is, does the city take appropriate action to address known departures from approved policies or unacceptable practices? The printing's in black and white. So do you have a color copy, or you have the black and white copy?
Unfortunately, I have a black and white copy too, but hold on, we do have a color copy. The no responses are at the bottom, and it'll be very difficult to tell probably in your copy, but if you hold it to the light, you can probably see where the shade of gradation changes. But the largest responder who responded no is in the fire and police segment, and that one probably gets close to 20. Administration looks to be 10 or less. Parks, their responses are less than 10. Public Works, again, appears to be 10 or less. And water, their no responses were less than 10.
Okay. So we're still talking about 20 to 30% of the respondents, though, in some of those instances, correct?
Yes, and I mean, I think one thing that's important to understand, again, the survey was intended to gather information to figure out how to move forward. It wasn't necessarily the forum where we asked what, who, when, where, and how to provide any context as to what's observed, how far along they observed it, how often they
Absolutely.
observed it.
I figured that. That's the reason why I was just asking, just for clarification here and just for the public, quite honestly. And in the final page 26, are you encouraged to report suspected improprieties to your supervisor or management staff? Again, we have the same number in the administration. We have, was that 10, 8? So we have about 15% to 20% in some of these same departments.
The bar chart looks to be approximately similar, yes.
Okay. And I did have one more question, because I didn't see the total number, and maybe you stated it. Exactly how many transactions did we review?
So we performed data analysis on every single transaction during the time period. So it was millions of dollars and thousands of transactions. We performed queries to see if we saw duplicates, inconsistencies, anomalies. We selected a sample of 40 disbursements and pulled any hard copy support that existed so that we could then provide evidence that certain reviews and approvals were also documented.
Okay. And then my final question, did we review any transactions where of entities operated by city staff and departments during working hours that might be separate from our own government entity?
No, I don't think our scope did not include anything that would, from an employee perspective, review what other business ventures or relationships they may have, or did we do any work to endeavor whether or not those were conducted during paid city hours or not.
So if staff was purchasing using a separate, during city hours, using a separate checkbook or entity, you didn't review those, though. It may not have been in the scope. I don't know, but that's why I was asking. You didn't review those, correct?
So you're asking if an employee purchased goods from the city? What is
on behalf of the city?
On behalf
using
of the
a
city,
separate
but
entity.
used like their personal checkbook or their personal business to do it?
Another a private entity, another separate entity, separate checkbook.
Okay.
Managed.
So if an employee has an affiliation with a third party, they've got a related party interest in another business, and that business is procuring certain purchases.
So if during working hours, an
During
employee
working
of our city is working on behalf of our city, taxpayers are paying them to work, and they're doing work for a separate entity on behalf of the city and paying out of that checkbook, did you review those?
No, we wouldn't have reviewed those.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Councilmember Edson.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. How many, did you all work out of City Hall, or did you work from St. Louis?
No, we spent a week on site here in the building.
The two of you were here for
I
5 days?
was not here. Kara is the manager on the project, and we had a staff here as well.
Okay. How many staff members? Just one, or?
We had primarily one staff person on site
Okay.
with Kara, so a total of two for the week.
Okay. And I heard you say there were 52,000 transactions, but they weren't really reviewed. You just ran queries on them.
We performed data analysis on those 52. So yes, we did data analysis queries on every transaction that was in the disbursement file and the P-card activity. We did not pull files for every single one of them, correct?
Okay. And looking at, I know that you looked more at procedures and policies. Did you find any procedures or policies in place that required procurement to check when, how am I going to say this? When doing a bid process, especially for contractors, is there any policy or procedure in place that requires the city to check for violations, federal violations on that contractor, such as bid rigging?
I don't think that I don't think the policy addresses pardon, I'm going to let Kara address that.
I mean, one of the city council questions was about debarred vendors, and we looked at the policy. The purchasing policy has nothing in there, so there was no requirement for the purchasing department to look for that.
But the debarred vendors would only be like a city list, not necessarily checking like Department of Justice website to see if they have violations against them.
So there's actually language in your contracts that states the person is certifying that they are not part of that like federally debarred list, essentially. So debarred vendors doesn't necessarily mean state. It can also mean federal, and it can also mean a municipality. And we took it to mean all of those different levels of government.
Okay, so we're counting on people who have broken the law to be honest and tell us that they have broken the law. On that, I'm just asking.
Yeah, I mean, that's a recommendation in our report, that
Okay.
you now need to add that to your new policy. You need to have that listing, and you need to do that investigation prior to using a vendor.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Councilmember Syfe.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have one final question that I should have asked, but this our objective of this audit was to have it as a process improvement document, and I think we all knew that 7 years. A lot has happened in 7 years over time. If you haven't had an audit needs to be done. At what point in your experience does a municipality need to look at having an internal audit department?
That's a very good question, and me and Kara and I actually serve on engagements for other municipalities where we do provide an internal audit function. There are no real hard and fast rules. Generally, you look for, once you reach a certain size and your budget allows, it's always, again, a best practice to consider how you might incorporate internal audit. And internal audit can take on a lot of different factions. We have many clients that house their own internal audit function, where they hire independent internal auditors. They come in, they're sitting in the office, have a desk here every day, and they have an audit plan and they execute it. Other municipalities or businesses might use services of a public accounting firm or a boutique shop to provide that not only risk assessment but also internal audit plan. The internal audit is very different than your external audit, and the objectives are different, and it does allow you to kind of go into this level of detail or even a deeper dive into one section of like purchasing, for example. But it often takes a risk-based approach. So the step one of an internal audit function is to one, assess where those risks might be within your organization and develop a recommendation of a plan that might constitute, you can do internal audits every month, you can do them once a quarter, you can do them, at whatever basis you decide. But that is something that as a partner in a public accounting firm that provides internal audit services, I do think that it is something that the city would benefit from having that function either internally or externally at some point.
Thank you, Mayor.
The preceding was a paid political announcement.
not necessarily us. I'm just saying that it is a good practice for something to consider when it's right for your city.
Kidding. Thank you very much. That was good information. So you will take this report and you'll start working it.
Look at the recommendations and begin coming back to the City Council with modifications to our procurement and purchasing policies that will reflect those recommendations and any other policies throughout our organization that could help support the recommendations. Those may not necessarily be policies that the council is to review and to approve, but in the spirit of a holistic approach to this, I would be advising you all of like internal administrative policies that are under the authority of the city manager. I would be making you aware of those changes so that you can see, hopefully, that they support and complement and supplement the formal policies like the purchasing and procurement policy that you all will need to consider. I know that's a long answer, but that is our intention. The other thing I would like to say, if we might, is just a recap of the general summary of the findings, and that is that in general you found that the culture here was supportive to. I don't want to put words in your direction, but I think what happens so often is we'll dive off into a very specific area and forget about the general sense of the audit. And what is your general high-level report of your audit for the City of Lee Summit?
So, as our conclusion states in the technical report on page 6, what we're reporting is that generally there's an effective control structure in place for the purchasing and the accounts payable processes. But given the findings and the interviews and the survey responses, there is area to strengthen those up and continue to kind of strive for a higher best practice, better efficiency, more productivity. And that, again, the survey responses indicate that, and again, not being a statistical sample, but of those that responded, it seems like there's a high desire to try to do the right thing.
Councilmember Mosby, you had something, sir?
Yeah, I just had a couple of observations, and not really questions. I was, I remember when we started, there was I believe a contact with you guys and a proposed price, et cetera, and then us council members threw a wrench in it by having a list of questions to go to in addition to it. And I think the intent was, in audits you do quantitative or you do qualitative observations and information gathering, and I think primarily the most of the questions were qualitative in fashion, which bless you guys' heart, that's hard to audit, and it's even harder to provide responses to. But be it as it may, that was what was requested. I just had a couple observations, like on question 4, what actions, if any, has the city taken to increase the number of bidders? The response was, procurement provides all vendors who inquire bid opportunity instructions. Okay, so the question was, what actions to increase? Well, the response was not answering that question. Go on to another question, number 6. How effectively does the city use the internet, print, blah, 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 communication means to advertise procurement? It says department requesting. The solicitation may request or require type of advertisement. Good, yeah, okay. But it doesn't say how effectively it is. It just says they can. So we don't know whether they ever do or not, et cetera. And then it is difficult to measure the of these methods of advertising the opportunity. So we're stating we didn't even try to measure whether it was effective or not. All right, we'll go on to go to another one. And I've done a lot of audits of a different style of risk management, so I kind of know what was going on here, and that's the only way I can reference otherwise. And I think somebody else had mentioned this earlier, the disbursements greater than 1,000 were 12,000, but yet we looked at 40. I'm not a statistician, but that wouldn't appear to be statistically valid to look at 40 out of 12,000. It also asked provide a list of transactions over 1,000. That would be qualitative. No list was provided. And then whether city procurement practices were followed. Okay, that was not totally answered. Here's another, provide details relating to susceptible item pilfer control procedures. The response was the city addresses disciplinary actions. Well, that's the result. It doesn't say what procedures are used to control pilfering. That was the question. So again, that was the response does not match the question, isn't thorough enough. Another one here on list of sole source contracts and whether the city procurement procedures were adhered to. Okay, 54 were reviewed. It doesn't say how many there actually were. It says you were provided a list, etc. And then it says found 54 was 54 and one was not properly approved by the city manager. Okay, the question was more of there are 5 criteria for sole source contracts. Where's the response to that? Were the 5 criteria used, and were they used properly? That would be the audit. Okay. Another one was provide details relating to regular department reporting requirements. Says there is no established departmental procedure. That's fine. And then also on the minority issue of minority contracts, is there a procedure? The answer was no. Straight up answer, fair. Okay, but as you can see, there's quite a few that, and I'm not blaming you guys. It appears it's kind of like you get what you pay for. Okay, it was bid out prior to us providing these questions. I didn't see any evidence where you guys came back and said, well, there's really a whole lot more here to answer these questions. We went ahead and did it based on the first price. So I'm thinking it's our fault. We expected a Cadillac. We got a Plymouth. And I'm sorry, but that's kind of the way I view it. I am anticipating, and I'm just doing this as an observation, I'm anticipating because there is a tremendous amount of opportunities in here. When you really start looking into them in the appendixes, the exhibits, et cetera, not just the summary, there's a tremendous amount of opportunities here in a variety of areas. And the bottom line, and the reason why I ask is, well, there's a lot of businesses in Lee Summit that aren't getting a fair shake. I've had 2 approach me and say, we've been here for 20-some years. One said he was explained that I don't get contracts, and I was told it's because I don't do business in Lee Summit, even though he's done the exact same thing all around the country. He's never had an opportunity in Lee Summit, so how's he going to do it in Lee Summit? He works for municipalities all around. So I feel for those businesses, and I think that what the product, Mr. Arbor, that you guys provide is going to be very important, because when you really look in here, we didn't get all the answers. All this wasn't qualitatively responded to, so we got a average audit, sorry to say, based on the questions that we asked, and in some areas statistically invalid. So I just hope that the thoroughness of the improvement opportunities for the challenges exceeds the audit itself. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Okay.
Councilmember Mosby, if I may, there are, to the extent that the question asked for a list, we can, as we finalize this report and take the draft watermark on, we have that information and we can provide you that list. Certainly to the extent that there were qualitative questions that we needed to get answered, to the extent that our interviews revealed anything, we can look through those again and see if there's anything else that we need to supplement that answer with. But we didn't undertake to necessarily do kind of a performance evaluation and effectivity analysis for each one of those questions that did call for it. We tried to gather as much information as we could to provide the context. So With that, for those things that you're asking for a list and you didn't see the response, I will make sure that that makes it into the final report.
Thank you. Let's take a 10-minute break because we got one public hearing, and then we'll complete. So
I guess I need to know, has this been accepted by the council? Because I don't want to start taking actions on something
Well,
that
I
there
think
isn't
there
council
were a
agreement.
couple of things. I think Councilmember Mosby identified. I think Councilmember Marino had an issue on we had referenced council members by name, but there was one company that was, I think that was needed to be addressed.
Okay,
I think there was just one example.
Are you
Mr. Mayor, can I
saying
make
that you want
a motion? Can I make a motion?
Please.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to table this discussion to a date certain of January the 12th, when city staff is expected to provide their recommendations for policy changes to address these issues. Is that what I heard the date was you were going to do?
No, I will. I'll tell you that's not possible. And if it was possible, it wouldn't be a very good job. And I think you'd be very disappointed.
When
in
do
the
you
quality
think
of the
that
product.
will be?
I advise you all that I'm meeting with the management team next Tuesday for them to review this audit report and then to begin preparing the policy changes and recommendations. Some of those will be brought forward to the council for your consideration. And I would be hesitant to begin moving forward until I know that the council has approved an audit report that I can take action on. There's been many times in the past, not with this current council, that staff has taken action based upon consultant reports, and the staff has been asked, well, when was that consultant report adopted?
Okay.
So I'm asking you all, I'm saying politely, I'm not demanding. I'm asking of you all to give me a document that you're comfortable with the findings, that you say, yes, we agree with this. I know it may not be unanimous, but the majority of the council, that's what I can work on with my staff. Anything less than that, we're just setting ourselves up for more criticism.
Okay, then with that, ma'am, you'd stated that you were going to go back and provide some information. How long do you think it would take for that to take place?
Not long at all. I mean, if the council wants to provide me a list of any business names, business addresses, other related party names, if you want to give me a list of what you want me to include in our query, that doesn't take long to run the query, and it won't take me long to update that, augment that report. So I would say that we can have that updated within a week of the direction that we're given.
Would the 19th give you plenty of time, or the first week of February?
Yeah.
Which one would you prefer?
Either one is fine.
Yeah, the 19th would mean that you would need the information available to publicly post the Friday before that week. So,
Mayor, I would make a motion to table this discussion until a date certain of February the 2nd.
sounds fair.
Second.
I have
Second.
discussion.
Okay. It's moved and seconded to table the acceptance of the report to a date certain of February the 2nd. Councilmember Carlisle?
I just want to be clear. We're tabling this so that they can go back and run a query on information that we already know. So we're asking them to go back and do work of information that we've already been provided about one vendor. Am I clear? Is that what we're doing here?
One payment to one quarter. Councilmember Moreno's accusations
one
about
vendor.
Councilmember Holland is what we're going to.
Yeah.
We're spending $35,000 to get to this point, which the two transactions for $1,938, which we already knew about. But yeah, unless there's
But
something
now we
else,
want to know
maybe
more.
Are there other specific vendors they need to search for?
If I may provide, I'm going to
I'm
try
sorry.
to provide
Who
assistance.
I
has the
said discussion. It was mine. Rob was answering me. Thank you.
I was just going to advise the council and maybe remind the auditors, they may know this, is that there was disclosure forms for every elected official. So what we could do is we could look at those disclosure forms that were submitted to the Missouri Ethics Commission, and in those disclosure forms are all businesses, and you all fill it out. So any business or any with a certain percentage of ownership. So. I think it's great, Councilmember Carlisle, that we're clarifying what their task is, that we're sending them on our way. I would say that they take those disclosure forms that list all of those businesses they're associated with, and run that through the transactions to see if there's anything that comes up. If they are doing a business that they didn't disclose about, then there's even a bigger problem with that. So, would that work for you?
Well, I think, I mean, I thought that there were some folks that asked for the other items, some specific data, some list of transactions, some different things. Wasn't there more than just, I mean, there seems to be this accusation here that we're talking about, I mean, I guess the quote was one vendor in 1/4 of one transaction. That wasn't exactly what was stated. There was multiple people asking for multiple lists, and that's why we're extending this to answer Councilwoman Carlisle's question, so that we could provide all of the data for this body to make a decision, because correct me if I'm wrong, City Manager, but you did ask for us to approve this so that you could move forward.
Yeah.
And there were people on this body that said that they want this information in order for us to do that, correct?
Yeah, I was just responding to Councilmember Carlisle's comment about one portion of many things that were asked of the auditors, and that was the disclosure of elected officials who may have had businesses that did business with the city, and I was providing a solution for that one area. I certainly wasn't trying to indicate that that was their entire scope of the work that they were going to do.
And I appreciate that, and I understand that, you know, a portion of this body doesn't necessarily kind of discounts the effectiveness and importance of the charter, but the thing is I personally want to make sure that we're provided all the data so that everybody up here is happy with the data that they get, so then we can go ahead and approve a document. I think the date certain of February the 2nd provides us ample time. Thank you.
And if I could just clarify again, since I think I still have the floor, actually. All the other information that was asked for, I believe the auditors said they have, and all they have to do is add it to release this. What we're asking for now is for them to go back and do additional work. Am I correct? You would have to do additional work to get this part, but the rest we have, and you just have to release it?
So if you were to give us a list, or if we were to go to obtain the conflicts of interest forms and look at those names, we would have to run a query off the disbursement and the P-card activity to see if we see those names or addresses or whatever the information is provided. That is a query. We have to search for each name, so that is work
Additional
that we
work,
have to
correct.
do. To the extent, I think, Councilman Mosby's question regarding some of our specific responses that we documented in questions, to the extent, like, for example, where it says, question 11, provide a list of all transactions over $500 that involve elected officials. What we included in that table are the ones that we thought had in it, but we can include all travel advances, everything in that list. And that's requires the work for us to go pull that table and put it into this report, but we already have the query. To the extent that the council wants a report for all disbursements greater than 1,000, which would be 12,000 of them, I'm happy to provide that list. We have it. I just have to format it in a way that fits in the schedule.
Okay.
Some of Council Members Mosby's questions that had more to do with a qualitative assessment, I said that I would go back and look to see if we have anything from our analysis or inquiry that we think we could add context to it. If there's a specific measure or a call to do more there, we certainly can discuss how we might be able to execute that.
Okay, so we're going to take this and send you back to do more work. Are we adding any more cost?
Oh, you betcha.
Certainly, to run these queries, I mean, it will take a little bit of time, so it will be more cost. To include the table, I mean, we're incurring time to do that.
Absolutely. Okay. So you're saying you can do exactly what we're asking you to do, which is basically give us a flood of information that we already have and know, but you can still do it for us, absolutely, the way we ask you to, but it, yes, will cost us more money, correct?
Yes. So
Thank you.
Councilman Mosby?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Moreno, with all due respect, I think that what I was trying, when I gave my description and I noticed that there were gaps and the quality of the work product. But my intent there was to state, it is what it is. We got the report. I don't really, myself, I don't need a list now. Should have been done to begin with. Answering the questions should have been done to begin with. But I think my view is, as an elected official, that we have enough information to where staff can really dig into this and they can see, they can soul search, and they can say, we think we can improve here. And there's some of them are glaring. They're really easy. Some of them they have to kind of look at it a little deeper. But I with all due respect, I'm trusting that they're going to do that, and that I don't need any more information. That's just me, myself. I realize what kind of product we have. Wish it was better, but it's not. And I'm ready to move on to the next step, and let's see how we can improve on this process. So, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Marino.
Thank you, Mayor. So I guess I misunderstood Councilmember Mosby then, because it sounded like he wanted some answers, and he doesn't want answers. So I'll go ahead and withdraw my motion.
Withdraw the second.
So is there a motion?
Mayor, at this point, here's what I'm going to do. There's some great recommendations that they've provided to me. I'm advising you all that we're going to come forward in the future and show you some policy changes and recommendations to try to begin meeting some of these great suggestions that they've made for us. So thank you very much. And if I'm heading down the wrong path, I know that you guys will be more than eager to tell me about that. So
Send us a video.
yeah, okay. Thank you.
Very good. So we'll take a break. We'll reconvene at 9:15. We have one public hearing. Thank you.